Say test it again. Okay. Cool. All right. Hello? Okay.
Asking about Virginia APA, Brent?
Yeah, did anyone make it down in person? I know like it was like a hybrid meeting this year. I didn't go down. have it as a group, you got to pay more because you're.
Oh, but they're all, it's like the Ohio Planning Webcast series. There's no charge.
The third 2021 meeting of the City of Falls. First, let's call the roll.
Chair Krasner,
I'm here.
Mr. Stevens,
Here.
Ms. Teets,
Here.
Mr. Puentes,
Here.
Ms. Weiss,
Here.
Ms. Comat.
Here.
Oh, and Mr. Hira's not here. That's right. Mr. Hira is, I think he's going to be late again, right? His class is overlaps for the beginning of the meetings.
No,
I
he's
think he's,
vacation.
sorry.
Oh, no, it's vacation. I'm sorry. You're right. He emailed us. I'm confusing it. He's someplace better. So we hope he's having fun and not, tuning in remotely and listening to us. Okay, so there are 6 of us, and that's more than enough. I'll read the required remote meeting participation boilerplate. Hopefully, getting towards the one of the last meetings like this. It's still a work in progress, but hopefully not too many more where we have to read this. But for now, the meeting for which this agenda has been posted will be held pursuant to and in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708.2, as well as state and local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operation during the COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of the Planning Commission will be present at this meeting through electronic means. And all members of the public are welcome to view the meeting at our website, which is www.fallschurchva.gov/PC, and on Falls Church City Television, which you can view on Cox Channel 11, RCN Channel 2, and Verizon Channel 35. Public comments will be accepted virtually. Anyone who signed up to speak will do so via the meeting video platform. In order to do that, to speak on a public hearing item, you would need to provide general public comment. You need to complete a speaker form at www.fallschurchva.gov/public comment before noon of the day of the meeting. Following submission of the form, you will receive emailed instructions to join the virtual Planning Commission meeting. Any written comments sent in advance of the meeting, they're accepted at our email address, which is plan@fallschurchva.gov. Also accepted until noon of the day of the meeting. Anything received is sent to the Planning Commission and summarized here at the meeting. I will say, for the next meeting on the 17th of November, we are potentially having the public hearing on the Founders Road 2 case. We will look to adjust some of those public participation rules or guidelines for a virtual meeting to help facilitate public communication. So for the benefit of the commissioners and for anyone who's listening, I've been working with staff on that so that people who are listening and want to participate, we're trying to facilitate a way to contact us during the meeting in order to then get the link to be able to participate during the public portion of the meeting, even if you forget to sign up in advance. We encourage you to sign up in advance and follow the procedures, but if for some reason you don't, we want to encourage a healthy public airing of that case, and we'll do what we can to accommodate anyone and everyone who wants to testify and provide any public comment on that item at the November 17th meeting. just wanted to get that out there. Okay, so moving right along, adoption of tonight's agenda. Went over this as usual with Mr. Stoddard. I think it's very logical. Our main items tonight, again, are work sessions. And so I would look, unless there's any comment on them, I'd look for a motion to adopt tonight's agenda as printed.
I move that we adopt the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second by Mr. Stevens, I think. Any discussion? If not, we'll have a roll call vote.
Mr. Krasner,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Teets,
Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Ms. Weiss,
Yes.
Ms. Comat.
Yes.
Excellent. So the agenda is adopted as printed, which means we'll move along. We have no speaker series tonight. Just checking with Ms. Bazemore if there are any petitions that were received for items not on the agenda.
No.
Okay. So that takes us to item 6A, which is our action items. Again, tonight, all we have is the adoption of the minutes of the last meeting from October 20th, 2021. Are there any comments or concerns or edits for the October 20th minutes? Not hearing any. So
Sorry, I have one.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry.
Late on the in the number 7 line 133, the description of the meeting with the residents of the fields. It actually wasn't a regular housing commission meeting. It was like a community forum organized by the housing commission for the residents of the fields, and they actually met with representatives from Kettler and a representative from Legal Services of Northern Virginia and housing commission members, and there were some city council members there too. So Emily, if you want, I can work with you on this exact description of that, but it wasn't a regular housing commission meeting. There was a housing commission meeting after that community forum, but that wasn't.
133, is that what you're
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
133.
Yeah.
Okay. So we need some edits there. So I guess we can adopt it pending.
Yeah, I can work with Emily. It's a small thing. I mean, it's probably fine as is, but if you wanted to describe it, that Ms. Coman attended a community forum for residents of the field hosted by the Housing Commission and Legal Services of Northern Virginia, or hosted by the Housing Commission, where representatives from Legal Services of Northern Virginia and Kettler discussed issues with the residents or something like that. Yeah, that would be better. Okay. Emily, if you have questions, I can answer them. Thanks.
Okay, and everyone else, I think, followed that. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's right. It's better to be good to be accurate. And that's why we check the minutes before we adopt them, to make sure that they're accurate. I mean, people can always watch the video, but the minutes sort of summarize what we discussed, and it should be accurate to the extent possible. So that's fine. Any other edits for the minutes of October 20th?
I move that we adopt the October 20th minutes as modified by Ms. Coman.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. We have a motion. To adopt it as modified? Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Teets was first there. Well, second by Ms. Teets. Any discussion on the motion? If not, then we'll do a roll call vote.
And Mr. Krasner,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Teets,
Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Ms. Weiss,
Yes.
Ms. Comat.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So the minutes are adopted for posterity. Okay. That's all we have for action items. We're moving right along here. Right on target with Mr. Stoddard's timeline. Actually, now we're ahead. It's number 7, information items. 7A would be any planning commissioners' reports, and we do have some attachments that I believe, at least, well, I think the first one, is that from you, Ms. Coma? The video that was added?
Yeah, it's I thought it was just a really nice, it's about a 7-minute video. It's just a really nice overview of the different kinds of bicycle facilities that cities are building. all over the world, including in the US, and sort of the pluses and minuses of each of them. And I thought it really showed how, lacking for lack of a better word, paint only solutions are for the safety of cyclists. So I wanted to share that with you all, just because I think it's a really great overview. And there are a lot of new kinds of bicycle facilities that are just being developed now. Even some of the ones that are on this list, that were in the video, I had never seen before, and certainly never seen them in person. So, and they're not just things that are happening, in Amsterdam. they're happening in the US too. So I thought it was a nice video. I wanted to share it with you all.
No, that's great. I checked out the video, and it's I'm sure Mr. Puentes and others are familiar with some of that. And absolutely, I mean, but even locally, I know that things like a cycle track, Fairfax County in their bicycle master plan has areas designated for cycle track. Obviously, the hard part is in the implementation. Paint's always quicker and cheaper, but certainly we should be striving for more than that. Absolutely, it makes a big difference when people feel comfortable. And just a little bit of physical separation sometimes makes a huge difference, as anyone who cycles knows well. So thank you for that, Ms. Comont. Let's see, any other planning commissioners reports in the last few weeks?
Just mentioned real quickly on the Architectural Advisory Board draft minutes that are there.
Right, okay.
That relates to Founders Row 2, and I'll pick up one of the topics when we get to Founders Row 2, but I just wanted to share those minutes with everybody because I thought they made several good points.
Absolutely. That's very helpful to have their comments for tonight's discussion. Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Okay, anyone else?
Just quickly, the two groups with whom I'm the liaison for met. The Library Board of Trustees actually meets concurrently with this meeting usually. Nothing much Planning Commission related. They discussed a safe child policy for levels of supervision that are required for children when they're in the library. They discussed the ARPA funds and the potential library use. I don't think they came to a conclusion on that, but that's being discussed with them. The Human Services Advisory Council meeting was the next day. They discussed also that situation at the Fields Apartments. I didn't appreciate it as when Ms. Comont talked about it last time, but they talked about it being a pretty bad situation with rodents and other things, unfair rent increases, things like that. There is some progress that's being made, I think, since then, but something that council is going to stay on top of. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Puentes. Anybody else? Okay, I don't have any reports, but just a thank you to our city's electoral board, regardless of how you feel about the outcome yesterday. Our little city runs a very smooth election as far as, the processing of getting people through and quickly tallying accurate results. So again, thank you to the people that volunteer and work on our city's elections, because again, I think it was run very, very smoothly and as consistently is in my experience anyway. So I hope everyone participated yesterday in that. Okay, if there are no other commissioners' reports, then that takes us to our director's report, Mr. Stoddard.
All right, thank you, Chair and members of the commission. There is a written report in your packets this evening. A couple of things to highlight, as I like to do, to highlight things that are either going on in the planning industry or within the city. So first up is ULI, the Urban Land Institute, has announced its 2021 winners of the Larson Award, which is noted there, quotes, it recognizes innovative state and local policy initiatives that support creation and preservation of affordable and workforce housing. And there were 2 award winners this year. One of them is local. City of Alexandria won an award. They developed, I guess it's an overlay zoning district that provides a trade-off that in providing additional density, there's then an exchange and additional affordable housing is provided on site. And then the other award went to Minneapolis. This is not for their groundbreaking revamping of zoning rules, sort of doing away with single family. I think they've won numerous awards for that already. This one was for a housing production system that they've got in place, and it was looking at a way to reuse vacant land throughout the city. Minneapolis is one of those cities, like many in the U.S., that has a lot of vacant public land, sort of unheard of, sort of in and around this area, but it's something that other cities struggle with. And so they're looking at a program that's been in place now to take that vacant public land and find ways to sell it, get it in the hands of private home builders or essentially homesteaders that can then use that to put housing on. So always nice to see successes that other communities are having. Second thing I wanted to report on, building safety is prepared. The Building Safety Division within the CPEDS department has provided their quarterly report of activity for July through September of this year. One of the things just to highlight, since we are coming into budget season, they've done a projection of staffing needs, as they always do, looking several years out based on projects that are either approved or are in the pipeline and under consideration. They're currently staffed to sufficient levels to handle inspections and plan reviews. But as construction starts on West End, they'll be looking for additional staff resources to keep up with the inspection load as those buildings go up. So that's something we'll be looking at come budget time. And then lastly, this is a reminder about the East End Small Area Plan. There will be a community kickoff meeting this Saturday, and that'll be held at the Columbia Baptist Church. We're back in our old room. I guess we always know it as the big room, but I guess it does have an actual name, and that is Stevenson Hall. We'll have signs up around the building about how to get to it. The meeting will run from 9 to 11, and it'll follow the usual mold with presentation out so that everyone has a level playing field in terms of being informed about the area. And then the key part of the meeting is actually getting the information back from the meeting participants. So we'll be using the usual small breakout groups, focusing on a couple topic areas. Looks like vision and urban design, environment, open space and recreation, land use, height and density. And then the fourth topic would be about transportation and connections. And of course, all meeting participants have the opportunity to talk about all four topics. Next stop for that small area planning process will be a work session / kickoff with the Planning Commission on your regular meeting on December 1st, your first meeting in December. That concludes the planning director's report, but I might suggest after the work session items tonight, if there's still time in the evening, maybe a couple thoughts or a little discussion about topics for the annual advance, which we all will be having or scheduled to have at your second December meeting. And talking about it tonight would give staff a chance to prepare any materials you all want to have on hand.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Studd. Okay, so that brings us through our regular meeting to our work session item. So we've blown through the time, but I'm sure we'll find a way to flow that up. The first of the two work sessions is street naming. It's not a typical thing we talk about, but Mr. Stoddard, I'm sure, will explain this. Is to talk about street names for streets in the new West Falls development. There's a staff report in the agenda, so Mr. Stoddard, we'll throw it back over to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to walk through this one. Our lead planner on it, Carly Aubrey, is at another meeting tonight, so I'm going to step in and try to cover this one for her. And of course, the applicant team for West Falls is also on to talk about the proposed street names. This is before the Planning Commission as a work session item tonight, and it is scheduled for you all as a public hearing item at your next meeting, November 17th. And as you mentioned, Chair, this is recommendations on the street names for the West End development. You can see in the Planning Commission staff report that there is on line 40 a table of the proposed street names, and we'll pull up a graphic of those in a minute so folks can understand how that would lay out in the site area. Lines 22 through 36 of the staff report lay out the applicant's principles or their narrative and rationale for the street names they picked. And I know there was a question about why is the City Council and Planning Commission reviewing street names, and that's covered. And actually, this is probably a good time to jump to the attachment. It's the council staff report that was attached. And and we don't have to jump to it in the text. I like having this graphic up, but there is a process laid out in the city code for how city facilities are named. And because these are streets that may potentially be funded by the CDA, which of course is a public authority, the idea was to have the street names go through that process for naming city facilities. Ms. Bazemore, thanks for pulling that up. These are the proposed street names. This map is oriented with Route 7, Leesburg Pike at the bottom of the page, Haycock Road on the right side of the page. And I'll actually stop my presentation here. I'm happy to take any questions from the commission. Otherwise, we can turn it over to the applicant for their I guess, presentation, if I didn't steal the whole thing. All right. I know we got a couple folks from the applicant team. Who wants to take it away?
Hey everyone, my name is Caroline Crawford. I'm with Hoffman and Associates and part of the development team. I can walk you through the general approach here. So, when we started thinking about the street names, we wanted to make sure that they were going to be relevant to, the greater Falls Church community. And so the first thing we thought about was Falls Church's status as a Tree City USA community. So as you've probably noticed, we thought about we were trying to use tree names that haven't already been used by the city, which was a hard feat to do. You took a lot of good ones. But so that's what we came up with Magnolia and Mulberry Street here. We also really liked the idea of Arbor Way, which is the pink vertical street that you can see, to have sort of a nod to the Grove area that's going to be across from the high school and middle school. So we thought that was a nice nod to that area. Cardinal Lane was something we came to when we were thinking about a way to highlight other aspects of Virginia, and the cardinal is the state bird of Virginia. One of the other things we liked about Cardinal Lane was that it sort of tied in nicely, we felt, with the Meridian High School name, with that new name. So Meridian being a directional name, and cardinal also can indicate a direction, a cardinal direction. So we thought that was sort of a nice tie-in there. So we were trying to pick up on what was going on with the middle school and the high school. And then finally, probably the most important name is that we feel is the West Falls Boulevard. And this street is going to continue up through the Virginia Tech site and through eventually to the Metro site up even further north. So we feel like it's really important for this project to have a significant presence with its name in terms of the placemaking, that the street will hopefully continue all the way. Will definitely continue all the way to that Metro site. So we think that the West Falls Boulevard is a nice way of indicating that. Happy to take any questions. And
so, Mr. Stark, before we get to Mr. Stark, can you explain? I think when we chatted, it's just as far as like what's going on here, like the status of these streets, public versus private. Mm-hmm. We can explain that, because obviously normally if this was a private development, and the developer would typically pick the names for the streets. I guess the city could, based on whatever our conventions are, we would assign the addresses and whatnot. But can you kind of explain, again, what the status of these streets are and now and in the future?
Sure, I can speak a little bit to how streets, I guess, would normally get named. So normally that would be handled, I suppose, as part of the subdivision process or the site plan process. And that's how these things would normally get named. I think this moved through sort of those stages while still having temporary street names. And so there was an open question about how to assign the name. So that's how we referenced that that's how we landed on that reference in the city code about the naming of public facilities. But I think your question is less about the process and probably more about the ownership of the streets.
Right.
Okay. So for that, I may actually turn it. I'm not as familiar with that. So I may actually, if you'll allow it, I may actually turn that question over to the applicant team just for the latest on the status of the street ownership.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that a little bit, and I know that Matt Steenhook's also on the line, so he might interject. But so the streets, because we have a CDA bond, this Community Development Authority bond, which is going to be issued, and that supports the investment into public infrastructure. So streets and public utilities. So anything that does any public improvements that's being funded by that bond will be public. So I don't know if that answers your question. So those areas, basically the streets will be carved out and won't be part of the private development ultimately.
Okay, so they'll be public. They'll eventually be dedicated as public rights of way.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay. So, Mr. Stoddard, I mean, before we get into this with the commission, I mean, the staff report kind of says that there's some of the names that are listed here have already been, there's been some comments from Fairfax County and from others objecting or raising concerns with the names, some of these names. And so, I mean, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so when a street name gets proposed, it's run against obviously the list of streets in the jurisdiction, streets that already exist in the jurisdiction. Obviously, you don't want to have an overlapping street name. So we ran a check against the streets in Falls Church. And certainly there are a number of streets that use Falls in the street name. In this case, we want the street eventually to be able to go through the Virginia Tech site, the WMATA site, and make that connection all the way to WMATA. So we asked Fairfax County staff to run a check against their catalog of street names. They identified one or two with similar names as well. There is a value, I think, in having this name of West Falls Boulevard. It's next to the West Falls Church Metro. It's on the west end of Falls Church. And obviously Boulevard is a very appropriate name given sort of the tree line nature of the street, how the median is used, and the fact that the street and the buildings really function as a pair, one whole system. So I think at the staff level, we're still having that conversation with Fairfax County staff to see if we can't find a workable solution to keep this West Falls Boulevard name as the applicant has proposed. I thought there are a lot of good reasons to have it, and so we just want to finish that conversation.
Okay. Right. I agree that that's probably the most important name, and since it's going to cross the jurisdictional line, it needs to be coordinated and it needs to not be confusing. I mean, I'll open it up to the rest of the commission in a second, but I know that, for example, there's always been like a confusing, like West Falls Church, there's the metro station, there's a strange census designation of West Falls Church, is a CDP, which is actually south of Falls Church, which has always been very confusing, but there's some history behind that. So obviously, I think, there's some logic to having a street with that name being near the metro station with the same name. But, again, it's the kind of thing where we need to coordinate on some of the other streets. Again, I think we need to be careful about avoiding confusion with other streets that have a Falls Church address, even if they're in a different zip code. I know there's a Magnolia Avenue down in Bailey's Crossroads, which is a Falls Church zip code. So it's not a street. I think it's an avenue, but there's that's a potential point of confusion. There's a zillion things named Cardinal, kind of around. There's a Cardinal Elementary School, I think, somewhere. There's a Cardinal, a lot of things named Cardinal, down in Springfield, because there's Cardinal Forest down there. So anyhow, there's lots of, I don't know, I think we just need to be cognizant of that. So I think the point, just for my fellow commissioners, the point of the discussion tonight, to kind of do a little brainstorming on this. I don't know if we're going to be able to really decide anything tonight that we can all endorse, but it's just a work session. So it's really just to kind of brainstorm. I mean, some type of theme that's kind of, around the street names. I think there's logic to that too. But I don't know if trees are the best or most creative or original theme for this type of a development, but I don't know, maybe other people feel differently. So I don't know, with that, I'll open it up to discussion. I see Mr. Stevens has his hand up. So go ahead, Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, just a minor point on West Falls Boulevard. I guess I usually associate the term boulevard with a road that doesn't permit trucks, like Route 50, Arlington Boulevard, so forth. I'm sure it technically doesn't preclude trucks, but I just thought I'd mention it in case, someone raises that issue, that we've at least thought that through.
Yeah, no, that's very valid. Yeah, in fact, that's the other side of the equation, right? Is like the type of street, avenue, boulevard. I mean, I guess planners can get into the weeds with that stuff sometimes, as far as the distinction between a street, a boulevard, a way. But we all know they do have certain connotations, and I think it's not just semantics. So, yeah, that's fair game. I think everyone should comment on the street type as well. And, boulevard might be good, or avenue, but yeah, I'm interested to hear what other folks have to say about that as well. Anybody else have any thoughts on this very exciting topic? Ms. Cohen.
I like this topic. I think this is the kind of fun, creative thing that I think is kind of cool. I personally like the names. I like the tree theme. I definitely like West Falls as the name for the main street to connect to the West Falls Church Metro. I would say, I like the emphasis on native trees. If you want to go for something that's maybe a little more unique, you could look at native shrubs. We have a lot of really cool native shrubs like winterberry, sweet spire, viburnum, ninebark. I mean, there's some really cool, other options that might be a little less commonly used than some of the tree names on streets in the area.
Right. No, that's a good point. Let's see. Anyone else have any thoughts on this? Ms. Teets, go ahead.
I was just going to say too that like mulberry is not like a super great choice, because there's like only one native mulberry, and most of the mulberries you see are non-native invasives. So I'm just going to back up when this comment said that there is some other native names that might be nice to have in there. Like redbud would be nice. Redbuds are really pretty, and there's a lot of them in this area. Also, ubiquitous in the stream valleys around here are pawpaw trees. So those are some things that are kind of have some fun names. Mulberries, I don't really have a problem with any of them per se, but I definitely I think mulberry is just something you see a lot of places. And the same thing with magnolia. I think we could come up with some better trees there. I do like the West Falls Church Boulevard, and I do like the Arbor Way. I think those work really nice. And Cardinal, I do like the fact that Cardinal and Meridian do have kind of a common theme to it. It does get confusing. My street is off of Roosevelt Street, which is off of Roosevelt Boulevard and Sycamore Street. So it's like a really weird thing for some people, because we actually have two Roosevelts. We have a Roosevelt Street and a Roosevelt Boulevard, because it has to do with Arlington and Falls Church, where we kind of come together, in Fairfax in a weird place. So, sometimes you can't get it perfect. At least our streets aren't as crazy as Arlington, where you'll have like a 2 blocks of a street that disappears for 3 blocks and it shows back up again.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And like we have 2 Sycamore Streets. There's a little tiny baby Sycamore Street near where I live. And then there's the more well-known Sycamore Street in Arlington, but then there's, which also I think a portion may dip into the city, or maybe it's just outside the city. But I know it confuses people sometimes because they think of the more well-known Sycamore. So to the extent we can avoid streets that are already in use in the immediate vicinity, I mean, obviously in Northern Virginia, you probably could find duplicates, but anything that's in use, within a mile or two, we probably should ignore that, not do things like that. Ms. Weiss, go ahead.
I want to underline the comment about not using a street name that's used nearby. I live on Knollwood Drive, which is a very small street in the city of Falls Church, and we regularly get folks looking for Knollwood Drive, Falls Church, and Bailey's Crossroads, so I wouldn't want that happening here. My reaction to the street names was first to ask myself the question of trying to remember what the tree canopy coverage is here. So I don't know if any of the applicants have that number handy. But the second reaction was to feel like I don't think these tree names are terribly unique, which, you know, others have said that. And I also don't know, you know, it's nice, but are we living up to the name, right? It's sort of like, are we really supporting the trees that we are talking about, or the native species that we want here? Was kind of one side of the coin, and the other side of the coin was, what are we trying to achieve in this neighborhood, and does Cardinal Lane achieve that? So I mean, I'm fine with trees. You know, I wouldn't fall on my sword over any of this. I like the idea of more native plants, but does this really demonstrate what we're doing? And are there other concepts that you considered, like related to education or innovation, or, you know, sort of urban, you know, vibrant neighborhoods that you thought about and didn't, you know, share with us here? So that was a lot there, but hopefully that made sense.
That's a great observation, Ms. Weiss. I think I agree in the sense that, I mean, right. I mean, there's nothing wrong with tree names. I mean, they're some of the most common street names in the country, probably. But the fact that this is the most dense, you know, densely developed part of the city, I mean, we hope we do have some good street trees here, but, you know, perhaps a different name for a more urban, new neighborhood. Essentially, we're creating a new neighborhood out of nothing here. And people are going to live here in addition to shop and do other things here. We already have people going to school here, but maybe there's a different theme other than trees, you know, that might be, you know, appropriate or more inspirational or more memorable. So I think that's a fair critique. Ms. Coma, go ahead.
I just wanted to Ms. Weiss's comments. I had the same initial reaction of the sort of truth in naming. Is this, are we really, is this, you know, are we going to see mulberry trees on these streets? I was curious about whether you were planning on actually incorporating any of the trees that are on the streets that are bearing their names. Do you know if that's something that's in the plans? I imagine it depends on the location. You might not be that far along in the process, but was that something that was considered?
So I can say we don't have a magnolia or a mulberry tree. You know, and some of these streets are, like you were talking about, the Cardinal Lane, are more of a dense urban environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there'll be a lot. I mean, there's going to be lots of plantings around the project.
Yeah, I don't know. I vote for shrubs then. Or I mean, a different theme could be interesting. Maybe something. I feel like it should be something that's tied to Falls Church, though. I don't know if that's some sort of historical theme. I know that can be tricky with individual people. I personally like the emphasis on nature. I worry a little bit about themes centered on sort of innovation. They can kind of get a little dated pretty quickly. Innovation is something that moves fast, or they can just be a little too generic, like Innovation Way. I think is there's a lot of those all over the United States. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, no, point well taken. Thank you, Ms. Comat. But yeah, the whole point about, you know, I think everyone is familiar with, you know, every town has an elm street and there are very few elm trees left. And people always, I mean, at least some folks in this space think about that sometimes. You know, it normally, you know, it'd be kind of ironic to, you know, and we'd hate to have people say, well, wait a second, they named it Magnolia Street, but there's no magnolias. So, yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I think to find something that, I mean, I'm sure, you know, it's the kind of thing, if we put it out to like a public opinion survey, we get like hundreds of different suggestions. It would be hard to build consensus around anything. But I mean, obviously there are, you know, these, I think staying away, certain things I think that we shouldn't consider is, you know, I think naming after people. I don't think we want to go there. You know, there are certain themes I think it's wise to steer clear from these days. You know, I think that would be difficult, but I don't know. I mean, it's, you know, in some ways this is a new neighborhood, not in some ways, in many ways, this is a new neighborhood in the city. And I feel like the street name should sort of, you know, obviously these are streets that are not going to, other than West Falls Boulevard, which will be connecting, these other streets are not going to, you know, connect through to other parts of the city. We're not extending any existing streets here. So, you know, these streets will be thought of as streets in this development. When people hear an address or anyone referring to this, so you want it to be, in some ways, it should be evocative. It should, you know, it should trigger in your mind an image of this kind of place. And so again, I'm not sure if like some of the tree names do that, only because we have a neighborhood with some tree names. Like where in my neck of the woods, we have Oak Street, and then Sycamore, Walnut, Pine. And you would think, some people might think, well, if I hear a tree street, it's near those other streets. And this, of course, is not. So I don't know. I mean, if that bothers anybody else, but like sometimes, there's certain neighborhoods where the names are, you can kind of see a theme or a pattern. Sometimes, you see neighborhoods named after universities or named after states or named after whatever it is. But in this case, this would sort of be, this is never going to be able to connect to anything else in the city. So perhaps the name should be, the theme should be a little more unique. I don't know. But again, that's just my opinion. Any other commissioners have any other thoughts on this? How about the street types? I mean, is everyone comfortable with calling the main street a boulevard? I mean, to be a boulevard seems generally appropriate. A boulevard that has a sense of a shopping street, a wider street. Sometimes boulevards can be associated with higher speed traffic, and more volume, but not universally so. I don't know. How does everyone feel about boulevard for West Falls? Anyone have any major objections to calling it a boulevard? Silence, I'll take that as no one has a major objection to calling it a boulevard. I don't know, do we have any other boulevards in the city, Paul? Would this be the first boulevard we have?
There is Roosevelt Boulevard, which was already mentioned.
Roosevelt Boulevard, that's right.
And that is certainly a tree-lined street over there on the east end of the city, linking the East Falls Church Metro to the east end of the Eaton Center.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So Roosevelt's the boulevard. I don't think we have another one. But I think a boulevard can work. I think that works. Well, so Paul, what was like the thought for tonight? I mean, we're not going to be able to, I think, just come up with a consensus on what they should be called. And ultimately, is it going back to council? I mean, this is a recommendation to council. They're going to have to vote on this.
Correct. Your action is to make a recommendation to council. And there's already been some conversation tonight about whether I think some of the things we heard. One, obviously, try to avoid naming confusion with nearby streets. I think that's an accepted sort of practice in street naming. There was also a question about whether the street names sort of reflected the right thing, or is there a way to make sure that the street names match with sort of what's on the ground. So I think maybe the thing to do, if there are other sort of principles in play, and sort of themes that were suggested, other native species, other things besides trees, like other native plantings, or maybe some tie into the education uses, whether it's on the city school site or I don't think anyone mentioned it, but also Virginia Tech just across the street, just across Mustang Alley. So maybe the thing to do is for staff to have a conversation with the applicant prior to this coming back to you, just to see if we can't formulate or refine the plan in advance of your recommendation.
Okay. All right. So I guess we provided a fair bit of feedback. It's funny. I'm just pulling up the map, and I forgot about Birch Street and Spruce Street. So we do have a few other trees that are, kind of getting close to this area. There's a Hickory Street. So in kind of like that Ellison Heights, subdivision, old subdivision name, there are a lot of street tree names, but those again are mostly residential areas. I know now the shopping center has just been rebranded as Birch and Broad, so they're trying to capitalize on that as more of a neighborhood type of vibe, I guess, which is, and they use the existing street name there, but so I guess there's some logic maybe that this, to have more tree names, but Mr. Puentes, what do you have to add?
In addition to Mr. Stoddard's principles he laid out, I thought Mrs. Teese's recommendation, we don't name them after invasive species, is a really good one. I didn't know that a mulberry tree was potentially invasive, but I think that's a good principle to keep in mind if we're going for a nature route.
Yeah, I agree. So So what's the schedule for this? This would be coming back to us just in 2 weeks. So I guess the question is, we provided some feedback. I mean, Paul, is this one of these situations where you're going to come back in 2 weeks with the exact same names and tell us to endorse it? Or is there a chance to change them in any way?
Well, I think, again, your action is a recommendation to council. So, and I don't know that council has settled on the names. So I think this is something where I don't know that you guys would come back with an entire slate of new names and say, thank you very much. Here are the ones we think you should use instead. But it might be, a more streamlined version of sort of tonight's conversation. And maybe there are some ideas for some suggested themes. At a minimum, I think the idea that sort of the street names ought to match, what's actually on the ground. I think that's a pretty good one. You can sort of see it, across the U.S. where sort of a street gets named for sort of what was there before the street went in. And so, so I think there is a value in sort of matching the name of the street with the identity of the place. So I think that's valuable.
Okay. Well, I think, again, for the commissioners, when this comes back, I mean, I think our motion would, of course, if there's any streets we outright just disagree with or object to, and I think we'd want to, put that in the motion, and, streets that we feel are great, we can say that too. I mean, I think that'll be fine to kind of give them an amorphous type of, ultimately they're going to have to make the call. We can provide our 2 cents. But yeah, I think that's going to be probably the best way to go about it. Short of coming up with our own, theme here, which I don't know if we're going to be able to do that, given the amount of time. Yeah, Paul.
I was just going to say, to jump in, right? I know we're sort of focusing, this part of the conversation a lot on sort of maybe things people aren't quite comfortable with. But earlier in the conversation, right? A very early piece that was named was Mustang Alley, and people said, well, that makes a lot of sense. It's named for the high school mascot. And then, West Falls Boulevard, assuming we can work it out with Fairfax County staff, people said, well, that kind of makes sense. It's West Falls Church. It's the West Falls Church Metro. Arbor Way was one that people seem to like. So I think, where there is sort of, general agreement is on those streets that are connected to sort of what's there, what's proposed. So I think there are some positive things to build on here. I don't think it's sort of redoing the whole thing. I think it's taking what works and seeing if there's a way to build on that momentum.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And of course, the more I look at the map, the more street trees I see. But I'm forgetting about Chestnut Street, which is right across the street. So there are a lot of street tree names in the vicinity. The question is, like, do we want to, have this seem like an extension of those predominantly residential areas, or should this kind of stand out more? I mean, it's kind of the way you want to approach it. But I guess we'll see. I mean, it's interesting. Normally, the developer might, have strong opinions from a marketing perspective about such things. So, I guess if they're endorsing this, they feel this is these names are perfectly good for, leasing to people and having folks, want to move in here. But anyway, okay. Well, unless we have more to talk about tonight, I guess, we can think about it over the next couple of weeks, and we'll put it all into a big, maybe somewhat rambling motion in 2 weeks to tell the council, hey, these are our thoughts, and now it's up to you to decide what to do here. But we'll go on record with our opinion, I guess. So I guess that'll be our plan. Okay, well, I'm not hearing any. Oh, Ms. Come
Sorry, I just thought of one more thing. I have a hard time. I can see the difference between the boulevard and the other streets, but I don't necessarily know the difference between like Mulberry Lane and Arbor Way. Like, if they're similar streets, then I feel like they should be named similarly as either lanes or ways. Streets should be streets, and lanes should be lanes, and ways should be ways. So maybe that's just another principle to consider in this.
Yeah, right. A lane, right? You think it might be much like a small, narrow type of street. Same thing with a way. Maybe could be through. I agree. I mean, I think in a more urban area too, you wouldn't typically see at least not typically, like in a commercial area, you wouldn't see lots of like, lanes and courts and ways. You'd see more streets and alleys and, things that evoke more urban, which I think is kind of what we're trying to go for, at this development, given the density that we approved here. So I don't know, all good points. So I guess we'll continue to stew on this, and we'll come back in 2 weeks and try to put it into some type of motion that lays out how we feel, and hopefully we can get some consensus from us as a group for council that will be helpful for them when they have to make the final call on this. Okay. Well, if no one else has more on that topic, we will move right along. So our next work session of the evening, item 8B, of course, is our second work session on the special exception and rezoning application for the mixed-use project, otherwise known as Founders Row 2. Of course, everyone remembers our first work session. This is a second work session to continue to provide feedback and comments. And the plan would be to, again, lead up to a public hearing on this item in 2 weeks on November 17th. I think for tonight, obviously we're going to continue to hit on certain points, and everyone's going to have a chance to comment on that. One thing I would just say to everyone to help, again, try to organize our comments, and I think that'll be most helpful for council as far as a recommendation goes. Is I think it's important that we tie, we're all cognizant of tying, all of our recommendations back to the special exception criteria. I think all of it is in there. The special exception criteria are fairly comprehensive, but making sure that we're tying back, any of our suggestions and recommendations to making sure the project meets the primary and secondary criteria for the special exception. And of course, the special exception criteria references the small area plan. So since that's, obviously been an area that there have been a lot of comments and concern from the community, from others. And I think we want to make sure, our statutory responsibility in reviewing this type of project for council is to make sure that, we tell them whether or not we feel it's meeting the zoning ordinance, meeting that, the special exception criteria, and it's meeting the ultimate, and then beyond that, or more fundamentally, the small area plan recommendations. So I would say, tonight and then leading up to the hearing on the 17th, I would encourage everyone to re-review those criteria if you haven't done that recently, so we can tie all of our recommendations, specifically to those points, because I think that'll be most helpful for council when they get our recommendations. So with that as kind of a preamble, I guess we'll start off with a staff update, staff report, and then also under the applicant, of course, is here as well. So I guess, Mr. Stoddard, I'll throw it back to you.
Sure. Let me go ahead and just do a brief introduction to the item in terms of where this is in the Planning Commission's process. So let's see, starting at line 5, the request section of the staff report. So the request is for you all to hold your second work session on this item, and this is in advance of a scheduled public hearing and recommendation back to council, as you mentioned, Chair, on the special exception and the rezoning application. That public hearing and recommendation are scheduled for your next meeting, November 17th. And they're spelled out lines 16 through 19 are the specific requests that the applicant has made. Zoning amendment maps the zoning amendment, special exception for residential and a mixed use development, and special exception for up to 30 feet, but what they're requesting is a 76-foot height. The recommendation, so there have just the way this process works. So the applicant made has revised their application material. They sent revised application materials into council. That's what council referred out to the boards and commissions for comment. And so at this point, the boards and commissions, including the Planning Commission, are asked to make recommendations on that last submittal received. Of course, with all those comments at hand and some further guidance from council, the applicant's going to continue to make revisions to their application. So what staff is recommending tonight is that the commission sort of use this work session for two purposes. One, to talk about the application in general, but two, to use the conversation tonight to inform, revise, edit what staff has provided as a draft motion, a draft recommendation for your next meeting on November 17th. And really using that conversation and the discussion about the project in general and the specifics to really hash out what are the specific things that the commission thinks ought to be changed, sort of the concrete pieces that could be used to make this project better, so that those can be sort of clarified in advance of your meeting next week. And of course, we've got the case planner, Jeff Hollern, here, and I'm going to turn it over to him for the rest of the staff report to summarize your conversation from last time. And the applicant, Joe Muffler, is also on here to engage in the conversation. And I don't know if he wants to give any updates, but maybe first I'll turn it over to city staffer Jeff Hollern.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jeff Hollern, case planner for the project. So Paul already covered the request and recommendation section, so I'll just skip down to the summary from the last work session. The Planning Commission discussed Founders Road 2 as a work session item on October 6th. This included a presentation from the applicant, and we also had several representatives from the boards and commissions that were allowed to ask clarifying questions and discuss the project with you all. I have bulleted a few points, not all the points, but a few points that were discussed. One being about commercial space, that the project as it stands appears to be a little bit overbuilt, that the Planning Commission does not want the applicant to be setting in on a fixed commercial percentage goal for the project. As far as our environmental goals, the Planning Commission would like to see more specificity in how LEED Gold is achieved, but that it's on the right track in terms of an all-electric building, which is commendable. As far as urban design and green space, the Planning Commission has asked that the applicant continue to work on architecture and tree canopy, and that includes chatting with the AAB and with the Urban Forestry Commission on those aspects of the project. Traffic continues to be a big topic for this project. With the Planning Commission, as well as some of the other boards, would like to see a focus on traffic calming for pedestrian safety, as well as the intersection at Southwest and Broad Street. And then also the Planning Commission brought up that it's possible that there might also be too much parking proposed on the site, even after the 17% reduction. So they have asked the applicant to explore that as well. But overall, I think that the Planning Commission overall viewed the economic impact on the community as very positive, and that the project should be done in frequent discussion with the neighborhood. I'm going to actually skip down. A lot of the staff report has not changed from the last time you saw it. A lot of the staff analysis and fiscal impact is still the same as it was before. What we did add to this staff report includes an expanded timing section, which includes a lot of the boards and commission schedules. That's what we've been doing the last month, is going to all the boards and commissions, whether it's the applicant, myself, or staff liaisons. We've been able to get to all of the boards at least one time to discuss the project. There are a couple that we're going to see again in November, and then boards and commissions will be giving planning staff comments due at the end of November, which we will then pass on to City Council. I have provided tonight, Mr. Stevens had mentioned it earlier, and I provided it, was comments from the AAB meeting that was taking place on October 13th. They had their comments into me pretty early, or at least draft minutes from that meeting into me pretty early. So we decided to forward them on ahead. And one other thing I included as well from the last time that you saw this project, it's attachment number 12, is the traffic impact analysis. This was something that was submitted to us along with the second submission, but it was not included in the materials last time. So with that, I'll turn it over to the applicants, if he has anything to say.
Great. No, thanks, Jeff. I have very briefly a few things to say. If you don't mind me sharing my screen, it's good to see you all again. But the reality is, and you all disappeared off my screen. So let me figure out.
Hey, Joe, if you
Yes.
share it, we won't be able to see it in the live stream and the recording. Can you forward it to Emily?
Yeah.
We will be able to see it. We haven't been having that issue anymore. So
Oh,
yeah.
great.
you should be
I'll
able
stay
to
out of the way. Sorry.
Great. No worries. I apologize. Well, like I said, my comments will be very brief because functionally it's the same presentation as what you all saw at the original work session. But that work session was incredibly productive, as have been all of the subsequent boards and commissions. And there were a few key themes that came out of that work session and then have been touched on since then. And frankly, Jeff just touched on a lot of them. Traffic, architecture, affordability, environment, streetscape, which is kind of just a subset of traffic and pedestrian experience, art, and retail. We've taken in a lot of those feedback. Again, we have not made the submission changes yet. We wanted to take those in. We want to get in front of council in December and then make our third and final submission. But just very briefly, just to touch on a few points, we have refined that left turn out movement from the garage onto Broad Street that has required a revision to the garage itself. We have met with the city's engineers to review that along with the signal improvements and the traffic calming measures on West Street, including pedestrian improvements, to ensure that the things that we've been talking about with the neighbors and with boards and commissions are supported by the city and are safe, and the engineering is sound behind them. So we continue to work through that. We continue to take feedback. While we know we won't be able to perfect traffic, we do believe we'll be able to improve it above the condition where it will be in the near future and today. But we are continuing to refine that. We are most likely going to be putting in an additional parking reduction, which has come up at Planning Commission and other boards and commissions. We are looking at additional pedestrian improvements around the building and exploring a potential bike share station as well with the city to improve accessibility around the site to parks. Architecturally, our architect has heard you all loud and clear. I'd be very interested to hear the feedback from the AAB. I have not seen those minutes and we were not able to attend that. I think we were double booked that evening, so I would be interested in that feedback because the architect is actively working on diversifying the facades and improving facades. Affordability, the comment has come up to look at additional options. If you were to do it 40% and 80%, and what we would like to be able to do is include either in our BCs or in a presentation, if we were to do 40 and 60%, it looks like X. If we were to do it the way it is today, it's Y, and differently it's Z, just so that there is a little bit of a buffet of options there for affordability. Environmentally, we continue to be focused on multimodal transportation. One of the things Jeff brought up is LEED Gold and how that's going to be achieved. I'd pretend if I told you all the specificity of how it is achieved. What I can tell you is we have our design team and a lead consultant on board. The program as we have designed it is already programmed to meet LEED Gold certification. So we are on our way to be there. And then there's a couple of other things as well. Public engagement process to activate the Founders Plaza through art. The emphasis on the neighborhood serving retail has been very well received from many of the boards and commissions we've been at. And again, I have additional exhibits here. This is a presentation that you've seen. There are some exhibits showing connectivity to parks, park facilities, some of the traffic calming improvements that we're posturing, bike parking, etc. But what I'd really like to do is pause, take feedback from you all, answer questions, and I can kind of go through this presentation as you best see fit.
Real quick, before we dive into this any deeper, just because it's being talked about in many boards and commissions and around town. Last time you were here, you mentioned a few just updates and things across the street.
Sure.
Is there anything you can share tonight?
Yeah.
As far as what's going on across the street?
Yeah. So we went to the Economic Development Committee, right? That's the name, Economic Development Council. We were on the EDC last week, and we did announce that we have signed a lease for 3 restaurants. So it's about 8,000 square feet worth of restaurants. 2 of them are sit downs, your date night sit downs. The other one is a more quick service, fast casual restaurant. I'm hopeful that we will sign another lease with a food and beverage tenant this week. And then the 5th tenant will be signing a lease. My hope is before Thanksgiving, if not sooner. They're very exciting. I'm being a little bit coy in terms of not disclosing the who, because I do want to make sure that, frankly, from a marketing perspective, that we are announcing things en masse to really create momentum behind this. But we do have an executed lease for 8,000 square feet, 3 tenants, and then 2 others are shortly there behind. In addition to that, we remain in conversations. We were looking at the plan as of today. There's only 4 spaces in the entire property that are not in deep discussions at this point in time. So there's a lot of momentum. These things don't happen overnight. I do appreciate, we're very excited to have the first tenant signed up and working already with the city on drawings, and more is to come on that. And then from a residential perspective, I think I told you last time that we had move-ins end of September. We've continued to work with the city on move-ins. I think we've got 35-ish units, 40 units rented. And maybe for this commission, one thing to know is the affordable units have been in very high demand. We've been able to lease those pretty rapidly as well. So that's been good.
Okay, I appreciate that, Mr. Mumford. I appreciate the update. Ms. Teets, your hand popped up.
I just wanted to be first if we were ready to ask questions. Are we at that point?
I think we are, unless anyone had anything else. Again, I appreciate you sharing about what's going on across the street. I mean, actually, just even in the Aav Memo, someone at the Aav mentioned that, and concerned about how long it takes to get storefront glass and other things to.
That's a great point, actually, Mr. Krasner. I apologize, and I spoke about this last week as well. So, as you can imagine, I mean, from the get-go, we have said that we want our tenants to put in their storefronts because that creates more diversity, especially when you have those incredibly long storefront facades. If you had just one homogeneous storefront design, that would probably not look great. It is going to take some time, clearly, for them to get in and install their storefronts. In the interim, we are putting decor up. We are putting coverings over those storefronts. I have been pushing that incredibly hard. I didn't want to put them up when this was an active construction site. They get damaged, but those should be up starting in the next week or so. So those coverings will start to look a little bit more activated.
Okay, good to hear. Okay, well, with that, we'll dive into this side of the street. And sure, Ms. Tees, why don't you start it off? That's fine.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you're going to put some kind of coverings on it because people are going around going like, see, they've abandoned retail.
Yeah, I know.
Like
it doesn't look good. I apologize. We'll get it up as soon as we can.
So I just want to say the first thing I looked at was the staff report, obviously, and I am concerned when I see 8 different things that the staff wants us to put in our motion that has to be incorporated before it goes to council. So I just say one thing. I don't want to see this come back and still have a big list of 8 things. And it sounds like some of it you're already starting to look at. Like you talked about, one of the things that the staff listed is submitting the leads scorecard. Some of it's like dealing with neighborhood traffic calming measures. So from what you've been saying, these are all things that you guys are looking at fixing, but I think it needs to be at the degree that the staff doesn't feel like we have to incorporate it into a motion.
Okay, I'll talk to staff about how we address that. I think there's a little bit of a dilemma between us making changes today, right, in the middle of a process, and then us using those comments to make changes for our 3rd submission. That's so I'll talk to staff about how to best address that. Okay,
but I'm just saying, like, that's usually, I'm not really pro a motion that has, like, I don't want to vote for something where it's got to be a whole long list of things that has to be dealt with. Sure. As part of the motion. And so whatever you can do to bring that list down would be really, really helpful. I know you said you didn't get to see that AAB draft, but they did point out some of the things that did concern me in terms of how the architecture looks. I think we really need to know where outdoor dining is. Is there space? And I think that this was Mr. Krasner brought this up before, maybe someone did at the last meeting. Like, how do people get in and out of Uber? And then maybe someone from CACT also brought that up. But like, how they're getting in and out of Uber, how people are picking up food, where people eat outside. Like, in a world where we could get another variant surge, all those outdoor spaces are really, really important. And it's still, at least the current drawings are still kind of monolithic to me. So anything you can do to break it up. I'm a little concerned about materials, and this is where I hate that we can't meet in person because I'd really like to see some of the proposed materials in person. Mm-hmm. And I think that the AABs also was a little bit concerned about some of the materials, and actually they also put in their memo they were concerned about the plywood across the street. So as a prelude to their actual comments on Founders Row too. They had a lot more specific comments. I'm not going to go over everything in there, but I just want to reiterate that I am concerned about how it functions at the street level, how outdoor dining functions, how people get around the site, how they get to the bike trail, anything to do that can calm traffic on West Street or in that intersection.
Sure.
Because it's not an easy intersection to cross.
No. And if I may, can I touch on a few of those just in response? And then again, I can go into more details of these maybe at the future meeting, but I do have some of those slides because those are comments that have been pulled up. In terms of the streetscape, this is a section from phase 1 that we would anticipate utilizing over here as well. Essentially, there's 20 feet from the face of the curb to the building. So you can see it today, it's a very wide sidewalk. Where those pinch points occurred, there's 2 pinch points. One is when there's a tree pit, which takes up about 6 to 7 feet. And the second one is when there's outdoor dining, which takes up another 7 feet. So if there is a point on the sidewalk where you have a tree pit and you have outdoor dining, there's still passageway for 6 feet, which is 2 people passing in tandem. And it's larger than the sidewalks are today. Anywhere that there isn't, if there's just one of those elements, either a tree pit or outdoor dining, you have 13 feet. And again, if there's nothing there, you have 20 feet wide. So they are pretty broad. They are pretty broad passageways, but what I can do is define outdoor dining areas on a plan so that if you are looking at a retail merchandising plan, you can see, all right, here's the areas for outdoor dining, similar to what we did at phase 1. But I did want to bring that up in terms of the section.
Yeah, and I understood that. I saw that before. I guess my concern is like, you're just showing that typical kind of dining where you're putting one table after another right against the wall. If you had to have more tables out there, I'm not sure you could do it. And I'm also like, I agree with you. 6 feet is plenty. You know, I worked in Old Town for about 20 years and people always complain about things, but Old Town's like that. It's got trees and it has outdoor dining. And to me, if you have a lot of people moving around, that means you're successful.
It's a balance, right? It's a balance between safety and activation. So just so you know, I mean, however the restaurant operator wants to utilize it, they have, 7 feet max. They have to you have to maintain that 6-foot pedestrian zone at the minimum.
I guess that's one of my points is like, could there be some some areas where the building pulls back a little bit to have a little bit more of a dining area? Like, I thought one of the things that was really successful about West Broad where the Harris Teeter is, that building's really tall there, and there's not a lot of stuff tall around it, but it doesn't oppress you at the street because they had that big pullback. Mm-hmm. And so I just, that's I know you don't have as much, property to work with as you did like on Founders Row or the Harris Teeter building has, but still, like, that's just one of the things I think would be really interesting if it could pull back and there's just a little bit of extra space at the street that gives you a little articulation, gives you a little bit more dining area. That's just one of my suggestions.
No, I appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Teets. I think Mr. Puentes was next.
I think Mr. Stevens was next. That's
really? Maybe.
It was me, but
I should have known Mr. Stevens would be next. But all right, go ahead, Mr. Stevens.
All right, I can jump in. First of all, I wanted to make a couple of just clarifications on the staff memo, just to make sure we're on the same page here. Specifically regarding the summary comments from the last meeting of ours. On line 35, where it talks about it appears to be already overbuilt, just wanted to clarify that the it there refers to commercial space in other projects around the region. I wasn't referring to, didn't want anybody to be confused, that I wasn't referring to commercial space being overbuilt in Founders Row 2. And the reference to the fixed percentage goal simply means that rather than just having a fixed percentage, that we need to look at site-specific circumstances before we decide what's an appropriate amount of commercial space. So just want to clarify that. And then a line or two down, line 37, the request for more specificity in how LEED goal is to be achieved. What specifically I had in mind there is the secondary criteria that relates to achieving a 20% improvement in the level of energy performance below that, which is called in this case core in LEED Gold. So I just wanted to make sure that that's what specifically I was recommending that we get clarification on. So far, I know that Mr. Muffler has mentioned this in his presentations, but I don't think we've seen it in any voluntary concession language. So far, it may be, Paul, that you have this in play at the moment, that you're working on an updated version. But I think it would be good to see that language, since we have not had this provision before, and it is an important one of the ESC. So those are two clarifications.
Mr. Stevens, are you referencing in the VCs the 20% commitment?
Yeah.
That has been added. We did an interim submission before the first reading that did memorialize that, along with one or two other things. So it's there. It will be there, and I can touch on that more later. But I just wanted to make that clarification.
Okay, thank you. And kind of a bigger picture issue, and this is just kind of developed in my mind over the last couple of weeks as I wander around town. I just wonder how many of these large mixed-use projects the city is really able to take on at one time. We've got West Falls coming up next year, as well as Broad and Washington, and possibly the One City Center project, and now Founders Row 2. I mean, they're all good projects. They have a lot of good things about them, but I just wonder, both from a standpoint of city staff, and we're down quite a few staff members right now, as well as the community as a whole. We really need to, I think about how many of these large projects we can deal with successfully at the same time. I don't think there's an answer tonight for that, but it is one thing that it is concerning me more as we go through these projects. We mentioned the Aav memo, and there are a lot of very good items in their memo. It was a good discussion on the 13th when I was at the meeting. And in particular, the Founders Row 1 being delivered with temporary plywood in lieu of more attractive enclosures. I think we could probably accept that if it were just a couple of weeks or a month or two. But I think what we're looking at, and the Aav makes this kind of clear with some specifics of their knowledge base, that we could well be looking at 6 months or longer for this type of an enclosure there. And I would certainly encourage staff to see if there's some other way that we can incentivize some nicer enclosures on these ground floor retail spaces that don't get leased out right away. And then the final point I had to do with the bicycle connection from the Founders Row to the WNOD. And I went there a few days ago just to kind of refresh my memory. And there is a sidewalk connection, of course, between the Founders Row 2 location and the WNOD. But the sidewalk is the one that's in front of the West End Plaza, and it's just a 5-foot wide sidewalk. It's not very wide. So I'm just wondering, since the developer has proposed $100,000 as a voluntary concession for sidewalks, if some of that couldn't be used to widen that sidewalk there to avoid the situation where pedestrians and bicyclists would be in conflict getting to the WNOD. And that's all I had.
Those are great comments. I'm not sure if staff wants to pitch on the last one. I did pull up a slide that kind of shows the varying connection points to the WNOD trail and some of the parks. This was part of the Transportation Committee's request to show how people can get around to and from the site and to various points. From a sidewalk contribution, I don't want to speak too heavily on that, because the thought behind that was for the city to decide, frankly, where that money was best spent after the project was constructed. So I'll defer to them as to the appropriateness of that.
My recommendation that the city take a look at that section of the sidewalk that's there in front of the West End Plaza.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. That's a narrow point in the city sidewalk network, because you're right, and it's actually up on the graphic that's on the screen. The WNOD, it's highlighted in that green line. There's sort of an off ramp, if you want to call it that, from the WNOD If you're south of 7 or west of 7, you can take that off ramp and get down to street level on 7, and then you're on the West Broad Street sidewalk. But that green link there, as you said, it passes in front of the neighbor's property, not the subject parcel. Whether or not that could be widened, that would be sort of a conversation with the property owner. And it would probably have to have a lot to do with whether it works for their existing arrangement of their site. It's worth exploring. I'm just thinking about sort of, one, the value of it is sort of making that connection, which I think is worthwhile. And then two, just sort of, what would that conversation likely be? And it's, what's the potential impact on the site? And who knows, maybe you could make it, wider enough to be meaningful, maybe without asking them to give up too much.
Yeah, it depends on right away. I don't know what the city has there.
Right. Yeah. I think city staff could explore that. I think that's a good idea.
I think now, Mr. Puentes, you're up.
Great, thank you. Just a couple quick comments on a question. Just to say, I strongly endorse Mrs. Teet's comments that I think at the next iteration of this, to eliminate as many questions as we can with the motion would be far preferable for me as well. There's still so many outstanding items that I know we've already talked about too. So it's frustrating kind of going through this again tonight because just some things that I know we've talked about a lot, like the safety issues. And we can talk about traffic calming, but I don't think it's much traffic calming as it is pedestrian safety issues that keep coming up. We got the traffic impact study, which doesn't address pedestrian safety at all. It's really just about throughput at the intersection. And I know we spent a lot of time on the left turn piece, which I don't know. I'm having a hard time, understanding the magnitude of that and just how important that is here. So I'd really just want to see more on the stuff we've already talked about, the safety issues and what's going to be done for those neighborhood common pieces. The other question I had was about your comments during the presentation about the affordable housing component, and you're still looking at a mix. I'm not sure how to get to resolution on that. Is that still an open discussion? Is that still something I know it's in the VCs, but how do we move? Maybe it's a question for Mr. Stoddard, but how do we move from where we are now to something tangible? I didn't know that was opened back up again.
Yeah, if I could, and that, to be fair, I think a lot of the process questions, those probably lie with staff. The reason staff drew up the motion and the way we did, I think is because I think what we were envisioning, right, is that the applicant has made a submittal, council referred that out, boards and commissions, including planning commission, would review that, make their recommendations on it. And that way the council and the applicant would have the benefit of all of that feedback from all the boards and commissions, so they could synthesize that and put together another application that addressed all those things. If timing allows, one thing that may be helpful to have, even if it's not before sort of, planning commission next meeting, but certainly before council next meeting, is maybe some proposed exhibits about how to address some of these things that have been coming up.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm happy to do that. We frankly have exhibits on some of these things. It's been a matter. It's chicken and egg, right? It's like when you present that, if you're with one submission and you're working towards another, and so that's what. But I'm happy to bring that to the next work session, or to the public hearing.
And some of sort of what staff is trying to do here, we had some confusion on a recent application where the applicant would really be, working with a particular board and commission to refine a proposal, one piece of the proposal in a particular way, and then they'd work with a different board and commission on a different piece of the project. And so depending on which meeting you went to, the project actually looked a little bit different. And so there was concern about, well, wait a second, are we being shown just sort of what we want to hear that night, or is this actually the submittal? So we're trying to sort of respond to that process problem that we had, or process confusion we had last time, but maybe we've overreacted. So I think seeing some draft exhibits for how to respond to these things probably would be helpful, and we can sort of figure out how to work that in.
I'll echo what Mr. Stoddard just said. I mean, I think that would be very helpful, not only for us as the commission, but again, for the public to, even in a conceptual way, see how, how you plan to respond without having to, put together a full, third submission. So yeah, anything you can show, anything graphical or other details you can show about how you intend to respond based on all the feedback you received, I think would be great.
Sure. Happy to do so.
Okay. Is that it, Mr. Puentes?
Yes, thank you. Just happy to see you're continuing to look at reducing the parking for the site.
Yeah.
Okay. I apologize if I'm out of order, but I think Ms. Comont was next.
Thanks. I just wanted to echo Ms. Tietz's comments about the space for outdoor dining. And I like her idea of pulling the building back to make room for it. I was also really happy to see that you are increasing the reduction in parking. And I was wondering if that could potentially translate to an increase in the ground floor open space that I think is recommended in the staff suggested list for the motion.
It's difficult. The parking reduction is likely to occur at the lowest level of the garage, for numerous reasons. So all I can tell you is that we will evaluate the program as best we can. The functional space that was meant for, outdoor dining, recessing the building, the big change was to the Founders Plaza, right? That was supposed to be that took away a whole chunk of the building right there. To continue to do that further, frankly, is probably infeasible programmatically. But we will explore ways of activating. But the Founders Plaza really was the big emphasis to say, hey, we've broken the building. We're bringing things interior. Frankly, some of the feedback we got when the initial proposal did have kind of retail arcades, recessed retail arcades, and there was a lot of negative feedback on that one, substantial negative feedback on that one. So the Founders Plaza was a way of bringing outdoor dining inside our property line in an activated space that wasn't like a recessed retail arcade.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. The other thing I was wondering about, I think your title slide mentioned the pedestrian improvements. I think maybe the slide we're on now shows them, but I don't see one on the west side of the building, pedestrian or bicycle connection there. Is that something that you explored?
So yeah, let me just touch on pedestrian improvements very quickly, and I'll have more exhibits for next time we are here. You can see the existing conditions, and in terms of where we are proposing how to, how the sidewalks are going to look afterwards. Improved crosswalks on Broad Street, improved crosswalks at West and Ellison Street. There's been a lot of discussion with neighbors and transportation committee on moving the Ellison Street, the crosswalk here, the east-west one, north of Ellison Street here, where it connects where the sidewalk is. There's a lot of difficulties, not even the right word. There are engineering and safety concerns with that are substantial. I'd like to continue to work, and frankly, this might be a site plan thing, continue to work with staff and the neighbors on what we can do with that crosswalk specifically. But right now, the support is to improve it where it is, create bump outs, collars here, which are proven to have significant impacts on corralling traffic and traffic calming. We have property, including the flashing your speed signs along West Street, because speed has been such an issue here, and that's been proven to have one of the greatest effects on reducing speed. In addition to the things such as the median brake, we have expanded our garage, frankly, to include a dedicated left turn out lane so that people are more inclined to use this rather than backing up if it's one in, one out. The last piece that I want to touch on is the west side cut through that has come up repeatedly. It's extremely difficult for us to accommodate that, given the constraints of our building and some of the associated infrastructure with that. We are evaluating it. We are exploring it. It has come up, and we understand the desire, especially the neighbors, to be able to pass through here and avoid, some of the busier streets. That is not something that we've been able to solve at this juncture. So just to be transparent, but the pedestrian improvements, again, the sidewalks are going to be wider, better, new crosswalks here, traffic calming being the signal phasing, the collars, the flashing signs. Various elements to improve pedestrian and traffic safety around the property.
Thanks. Have you looked at raised crossings for Ellison?
Let me bring that up again with my engineer. We had talked about that. Raised crossings, and again, this is me pretending to be an engineer, can sometimes do more harm than good from slowing down traffic and pedestrian safety. So I can bring that up again. Frankly, when it comes to a lot of these traffic improvements, I'm game for a lot of things. I have to defer to what's the safest and most effective measures. So, but I will bring that up again.
Thanks. I think that's always a good attitude to have, safe and effective.
Yeah.
That's what we're going for. Could you talk a little bit more about the public art installations? Are those intended to be permanent installations? Is that something that you're working with on with our other city board, the Arts Advisory Committee?
Yeah, so candidly, we had a really good conversation with both the Arts Advisory Committee and the neighbors on our walking tour. This is a placeholder image, just to be very clear. I mean, functionally, it is what it is. I like the idea of the planters and some activated materials here on the facade to draw people in. But this central element, I really seeing being a functional, integrated, activated art piece. And the way we had talked about, I thought was actually really creative with the Arts and Humanities Council, was making it a real process, very similar to what we did with the mural, if you recall, on phase 1, where post-site plan, it was a public process with, I think, with Planning Commission, but also with the Arts and Humanities Council. And one of the things that the Arts Council came up with was a process that was open to the public, maybe even bringing in the schools where you have your artists and you can take 360-degree feedback to create something. The image that keeps being conjured is, and again, this is galaxy brain, so don't go to this level, but like the Chicago Bean element, where it's something that really draws people in and it's something that activates that area. Something like that. Obviously smaller, we're not putting the Chicago Bean in here, but something that is integrated and active for people to interact with. Interactive, that's the word that I've continuously been looking for. So that's the conversations we've been had, and I do think that the next round of voluntary concessions will have something that speaks to that, very similar to the way that the mural did at phase 1.
Great. Selfie magnet would be great.
Yeah, honestly, that was I said I see this as being something like Instagrammable. That was the word I used. So
yeah, we have a couple.
Was in one of our small area plans, wasn't it, Mr. Stoddard? I don't know if that made it into the final version. I remember some draft small area plan had the Chicago Beans. So.
Oh, that was in our public art policy. There was some question about whether the city should aim that high, and I said it's not high enough or something like that.
Yeah.
So
there's no art that's too much for us, Mr. Mumford. Don't just.
Okay, and I don't have any more questions. I just wanted to second Mr. Stevens' earlier comments about his general concern about kind of project overload from both the staffing standpoint and sort of like a resident, frustration standpoint. Honestly, this is a good problem to have. I think these projects I'm a fan of development. These projects have been great for the city, but we're doing a lot of them all at once, and that seems really hard. So it's not a comment on this particular project, just a general observation. And I just wanted to agree with Mr. Stevens on that. And thank you for your presentation tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Helmont. Ms. Weiss, you're up.
Yeah, a lot of great comments by my colleagues, as happens, frankly, at all of our meetings, which I appreciate. I did want to underline the concern about the staff memo and the way it's written. I think we've talked about that and maybe overcorrecting for a prior process. What I wanted to suggest maybe to staff, and I apologize, this is less a question for the applicant than a comment to staff, is that as long as we have this list of 8 measures that we want to see included in our recommendations, and we see those as important to be included in the next submission, then I would suggest revising the tone and the wording of the whereases to say something along the lines of, the Planning Commission finds that this proposed project satisfies many primary and secondary criteria, but needs additional improvements. This project satisfies some elements of the comprehensive plan, but is lacking in others. I think just to be clear that this list of 8 these are not options, or we don't consider them cherries on top. This is, if it remains on this agenda, sorry, if it remains in the staff report, it should mean that the Planning Commission believes that these are important elements to see based on the comprehensive plan and the primary and secondary criteria, and they're not in there yet, or they haven't been addressed by the exhibits at the next work session. So I wanted to kind of put that out there as a suggestion for the staff memo. The one, one thing I continually see is sort of not, and then, sorry, two more comments. One, for the applicant, it would be helpful for us, when you tell us that you can't make, for example, that corridor work between Ellis Street and Broad Street. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us why?
Sure. Yeah.
It's helpful to understand, like, not just it's not going to work, but why.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the short answer is this is where we have some of our buildings infrastructure located that takes up the majority of that corridor. So in order to create that corridor, you're essentially taking away from the building itself and losing more square footage, which again, as I've detailed, I hate to always rely back to economic and feasibility, but that's clearly just a big piece of the puzzle here is we have to have enough to do what we say we're going to do. The secondary concern, so that's the primary concern, right? The secondary concern is safety measures here. You've got a large building here. This is not a dramatically wide passageway. I believe it's about 10 feet. You've got a building right here. In the future, you may have a larger building right here. Who knows what happens in the future? So, it's a long, narrow alleyway at the end of the day. So safety is a concern there as well. So that's the feedback on that.
Okay, I appreciate that. And that was more like in a principle in general. I mean, I assume that a lot of the we can'ts has a bearing on project economics, but it's just helpful for us if you can unpack that a bit more in any area. And then the last thing I just wanted to bring up, again, going back to the comprehensive plan, and the small area plan really envisions West Broad Street as a greenway and increasing open space. And you have increased open space, but note that the tree canopy I think is still at around 11%. And I didn't see in your slides mentioning that you made any sort of improvements or changes to the open space or the tree canopy or the landscaping. So if you could just address that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be, again, very transparently, it feels like we have maximized this site in terms of building footprint and open space. The tree canopy does exceed pretty substantially over phase one. I know it's below the 15%, but 11.5 for an infill site is still pretty significant. And the open space is far above where we were, during our original submission. A lot of this was, we're on our second submission. We took big bites in that second submission rather than kind of play the game of saying, all right, we'll do incremental changes so that at the very end it feels like we got a lot. We said, we're going to lop a story off this building. We're going to chop open the side of the building to put in a Founders Plaza. We're going to increase open space, increase tree canopy. So it doesn't feel like in the last 2 months I've made a lot of changes. It's because I made a lot of changes going into this, listening to the feedback very upfront to try to minimize it on the back end. So I would like to find incremental gains, but especially you have to balance commercial and you have to balance bicyclists, and it's just very hard to make all of that work. So I think we've hit some pretty good measures, but I just don't see dramatic improvements. We were able to find green roof space, in between submissions. So that was a change. So we are trying to find incremental. There are bioretention planners now along Ellison Street along the building. So we're finding that incremental stuff. It's very difficult at this point for us to make wholesale changes to create a new park somewhere in here.
Ms. Kuma, your hand is back up.
Yeah, sorry, I remembered one other thing I wanted to ask about. Can you update us on the status of the co-working space? I'm still a little confused about whether or not that is accessible to the public or if it's a private building amenity.
So it's a private building amenity and it is accessible to the public in as much as it will be available for memberships. So we will be capped at a number of memberships. So very similar to any kind of co-working space where you pay on a monthly basis to utilize that space. In addition to that, though, however, there will be a conference room space, a large conference room space in there that could be utilized by planning commission meetings are probably too large, but maybe smaller boards and commissions and city associated meetings, so that there is, we've talked to people at the Chamber of Commerce who have said we would love to have some meetings in a conference space. So like this could be an area where you're able to host those meetings.
Okay, great. So there's a conference room that can be used or reserved by the public, I assume for a fee.
Correct.
And then also a co-working space that is, so there's no sort of like drop-in basis. It's just you have a membership, but anybody in the public can access that co-working space.
The way we've defined is you have to be a resident of the city of Falls Church.
Okay. I mean,
sure.
I don't know. It seems limiting.
It's meant to be a city amenity, right? Like that was how this was. This is how this was come up. This is a city amenity in addition to a building amenity, and that city amenity has two forms. It's a conference space that can be used by associations or whatever, boards, civic commissions, and then it's a membership basis. And the general location is this space right here as you come down West Street.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess I'm just thinking in terms of attracting patrons to the city. You might want to broaden your potential membership base for the co-working space. But
I'm happy
thank
to.
you for
It gives
clearing
me a
that up.
broader pool to draw from. It's really
I don't know. Staff may disagree with me, so don't listen to me.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Gilmore. Let's see, anybody else? I mean, there's not much more I really need to add. I mean, I think, again, my fellow commissioners hit on everything, and I said some stuff at the first work session. I will, just a question I had, because I think the AAB folks raised it, related to the height of the penthouse and how visible it is or not. Seemed to be something that they were, they were concerned about. They mentioned that it was something that they were also concerned about across the street, as far as the visibility, into the neighborhoods here. Is there any, I don't know if it's more of a question for staff. Is there any, and they keep on referring to it as a variance, but it's not a variance, right, Mr. Stoddard? It's part of the special exception height bonus.
No, right. I read their memo, and I think I understood the question. I think it was a clarifying question. Part of it was a clarifying question, but then it leads into a substantive manner. So it's, is the requested height to the top of the wall, or is it to the top of the penthouse for the, and by penthouse here, we don't mean sort of a fancy residential apartment. What we mean is the mechanical room that supports the elevator equipment, which, right, because it's an elevator, the equipment has to be on top of the elevator shaft. So the zoning ordinance allows for penthouses to be built above and mechanical equipment to be built above the limiting height on the building. So I think the AAB was just asking, is that height to the top of the penthouse or the top of the wall? And then how is that penthouse equipment going to be screened? Where would it be visible from?
Okay. So it's not, right, so it's not some extra, height variance problem that we're talking about here. It's just, right. Okay, that's what I thought. I thought it was just the wording that was not accurate.
And just for clarification, we actually did work that issue out actually on Founders Row 1, where there was, I think, some mechanical equipment that was maybe missed at time of site plan. And Joe, I remember working it with you about how that was going to be screened, what materials were going to be used, and eventually we found a set of sort of complementary materials that essentially screen the view of that equipment from West Broad Street.
Right.
It was a while back. It just sort of that issue popped into my head when I saw the question from the AAB, but it's something that's come up on other projects.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe last question, because again, just to kind of circle back to what I mentioned at the very beginning. I want to make sure that when we talk about this at the public hearing, and hopefully reach a consensus, as a commission. The one piece of the primary criteria, I don't know, we haven't talked about as much, is just the financial side, and as far as the positive net new commercial and residential revenue to the city. So yeah, if you could just review that, Mr. Muffler. I don't know if we talked about it too much at the last work session either, but just kind of for our benefit and for the benefit of the public who may be watching, run through that.
Yeah, so speaking directly to the wording and the criteria, right? It's almost hard. The reality is the existing uses are contributing very, very little revenue to the city, like negligible revenue to the city based on the vacant uses. At the peak, and staff did this research for me, so I'm appreciated. At the peak, they were contributing about $60,000 a year in total revenue. The projections currently, probably needs to be updated, frankly, for Founders Row 2 is $1.6 million. So just orders of magnitude more revenue from this as opposed to the current use, past peak use, and the past peak use, given what those buildings are, it's hard to expect much more than what the past peak use was. Now, if you reduce those with the expenses, which again, I have kind of pushed back on a little bit because of the enormous pupil ratio that's utilized, it translates to about $210,000 per acre. I think with our updated VCs, that would improve slightly, but just say $210,000 per acre in net fiscal impact. The city's mixed use average is $240,000, so it is a little bit below, but it's roughly in line. Again, I think it would come up a little bit, so it'd be closer to that mixed use average. But from the criteria perspective, in terms of the revenue, it is pretty substantial.
Okay, good. I mean, and that's something that, again, I think it's important to, to continue to accentuate that part of it as far as, again, tying it back to what we expect of all mixed use projects and how it's meeting it. There's been a lot of discussion, around town, formally and informally that somehow, the project is, not sort of pulling its own weight, so to speak, or not, comparable to other mixed-use projects that have gone through the process. And so I think it's important to continue to accentuate that. And of course, if there's room to improve that, obviously, then that may be something that council continues to hit on, even after we're done. But I wanted to just get that out there at this stage too. Okay. I think that's all that I had. I don't know if any other commissioners have any other sort of closing thoughts. I mean, this was sort of an incremental step for us here in our process. And so I didn't expect it would be, as long a discussion as what we had last time and what we may have next time. Mr. Stoddard, your hand just popped up.
I have a procedural question, so I want to wait till the end of the commission's conversation, but it is related to sort of what you all want to see next time. So I just want to put a marker down.
Well, I mean, what I heard, and commissioners should chime in if I'm wrong or missing something, but what I heard, in addition to like the very specific comments, was we are looking for some type of conceptual graphic response, based on what you've heard, from the boards and commissions. As far as what direction the applicant's heading in order to respond to that at council. I think that we give some folks here some more comfort. We talked about folks mentioned the long list. I mean, I think that would give folks some comfort that you are going to be addressing hopefully all of the things on that list, and not just leaving it as a question mark. As far as that we're just we're hoping you're going to do it. So that's what I heard. Mr. Puentes?
Thank you. And I'll say not just the questions, but I mean the way the motion is written now. It's we further move the applicant incorporate the following changes, and then it says, for example, traffic calming measures, bicycle connections. It's just vaguely written, and it'd be tough to support the motion like that without knowing exactly what.
Right. It's too broad. It's too kind of aspirational. At this point, we need to be more specific. I agree. We're not looking to provide just very broad planning principles. We want specifics and we want it shown in the plan ultimately. So I think that, right. So I think that's exactly what I heard from everybody. And so I think that's what we'd be looking for, Mr. Stoddard. Does that answer your questions? And that way the motion itself should be specific. I mean, to the extent, things aren't reflected, in a plan, and we're looking to provide, a list of specific recommendations to council, they should be just that. They should be specific on what we'd like to see. And so, I mean, I would guess staff should do the best they can based on the conversations we've had. And, I think that would be what we spend a lot of time doing on the 17th will be that language and getting to that list of recommendations in order to, get a motion that we can support.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think we can bring that back, at least from the staff side. I know we can bring back a reworded, I mean, obviously a reworded draft motion. We can do that. I think maybe what might be helpful to the conversation is, one, any sort of draft exhibits that the applicant, has been working on, or maybe an updated memo about things they're going to commit to. Just one thing I want to put out there, what's being reviewed is the conceptual development plan. So I would think the fundamental things to lay out now are things like the building footprint, the percentage of green space and open space. Those are the things that are really not going to change as the project goes forward. Certainly not after council, right? Once council votes on a conceptual development plan, if they vote to accept it, that really sets the building footprint going forward. Things like the layout of where a specific crosswalk goes, or how traffic calming would lay out, that really gets handled at the site plan stage. So there are some things in the details that are going to be set later, and I think it's important. You need to get the commitment now, whether that's some sort of narrative in the conceptual development plan, a line in the voluntary concessions. That's what you need to lock in now. I think it's really the fundamental program elements that you want to secure here at sort of the level of an SE or a conceptual development plan.
And if I could just tag on to Mr. Stoddard, that's exactly how I planned on utilizing this time, as well as to memorialize. Here's what we anticipate including in our voluntary concessions. Here are some graphics that represent some of those commitments. But I'd be lying if I said I understood exactly how to screen all the penthouse equipment right now and all the different architectural breaks and facades. Like that's and the traffic calming. I can show you what we've contemplated thus far in the conversations we've had, and certainly continue to take that. But I do appreciate Mr. Stoddard echoing that's what we would utilize the site plan for. We're really just trying to figure out program and footprint. How do all those things work together? But I can memorialize and show you in exhibit form how we think we're going to approach that.
Right. I think that's understood. I mean, right. I don't know if we're expecting, when ideally, everything can be buttoned up and you'd have a clear picture, but we understand, the way the process works and sort of what stage you're at. But so I understand there's some specifics that maybe don't come to site plan and some things that need to continue to be refined. But as much as you can respond to specifics, that's kind of what we're looking for. And, so the more you can provide, the better it'll be for us as a commission to reach a consensus, I think, next on the 17th.
Great.
Okay. So I think that will do it for this discussion, unless anyone has any parting or closing thoughts on this item. If not, then I thank you, Mr. Muffler, and we'll look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks and having hopefully a good public hearing. And again, and for any members of the public who are watching, this has been a long time coming. We'll look forward to getting any public comments in advance, in writing or, of course, in person or in person virtually at the meeting on the 17th. So that takes us. Was there another point? Okay. That takes us to the end of our official agenda. I know Mr. Stoddard mentioned at the very beginning that it might be a good idea, since we have I don't want to take too long, but if folks, just can spare a few more minutes to discuss the planning, advance that we're scheduling in December to have a more productive meeting. It'd be good to talk about, a little bit about format and, topics, and just to make the best use of everyone's time and have the most productive session. The plan is to have it in person at City Hall. I think we're going to, Paul said the city will spring for some food. Right, Mr. Stoddard, am I misquoting you on that?
No, that's correct. I always try to reserve a little bit of money so that we can buy every commissioner a sandwich. I do what I can.
See what you can do, it can be, it can be hot food, that's good too, but we'll take a sandwich. So we'd have, to try to encourage a more casual discussion. And as far as the format, I mean, in the past we've done different things, and Mr. Stoddard reminded me about, I guess the last time we did it in person, we met at City Hall, and I think we did like we had like a board, and we put up our, kind of our top items we wanted to address in the coming year. Again, there are different ways to do it. I mean, when I always, Paul and I talk about this, I always, remind him or say to him, we want to make sure that as a commission, it's one thing for us to, sort of have a set of kind of priorities or policies or sort of ideals that we ascribe to, but, we need to always remember our sort of role in the process. And some of what we do is, our agenda is dictated out of our control by, projects that come in, before us. And so, there can be issues we want to tackle as a commission, but then, a good chunk of our time is made up of, how we respond to other things. But anyhow, with that said, again, I don't know if folks have different ideas about it. We have some, some new members on the commission that, weren't around when we last had a real advance. And so, I think I'll be looking for any recommendations or comments people have on that point. Mr. Stevens, why don't you start it off?
Yeah, I could toss out a suggestion. This kind of picks up from one of the speakers' presentation that we had, I don't know, 6 or 7 months ago from Mike Novotny on accessory dwelling units. And I know this is not a topic for the timid, but it's a chapter in the much larger novel of missing middle housing. But just wondering if we couldn't kind of have some discussion around whether or not we would like to consider some type of an update to our zoning code that would expand upon what we have currently in terms of accessory dwelling unit permissions, and see if that's something we might want to propose to City Council as a change to our zoning code.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. So that's a great suggestion. I mean, topics like that, I think we can, because obviously there's always two sides, the idea of looking at our ordinance, looking at changes to the comp plan. I mean, any way to affect sort of a policy change. I mean, we got to work through council, but things like that, right, I think are something we could probably spend the whole night talking about that topic, but I think we should definitely try to prioritize, maybe our top several that we can realistically try to work on. And I don't see who's, I apologize, I don't know, I missed who was next, but I'll just go with the list on my screen in order. So Mr. Puentes, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. Just two things. I think they're appropriate for this meeting. I'm not sure, but for the advance. One is off of Mr. Hira's comments. I think it was the last meeting on the CIP and the housing elements that could possibly be in there. I thought about that since that comment came up, and I was doing a little digging around, and a lot of times it's major construction projects, right? The housing itself in some ways, but it'd be really interesting to know if there was some way that the CIP could reflect our affordable housing goals and interests. Something that's specific for our condition here, where we're not building big buildings or doing, not having those big capital investments in the same way. Is there another way to do it? The CIP is such an important planning document. It just feels that there's a bit of frustration with the mismatch between the desires to have all that built, and we have this big document that we're not really able to incorporate it. So I'd love to know if there are best practices or other things that communities like ours can do. That would be helpful to know. Obviously not for this CIP, maybe for the next one. The other piece is I don't know if it's a bigger change, but it's and I know I'm a broken record on this, but the traffic impact analyses that we get from the developers, and when we get them, I think there's a timing issue. It does seem to be something that everybody wants to talk about all the time: traffic, parking, safety, all those kinds of things. But it's such a vague amount of information that, to be honest, I don't think even pertains to what we're interested in. Right? We get traffic analyses about levels of service, right, which is just how fast you can move cars through an intersection, and it's not in our comprehensive plan. There's nothing in the comprehensive plan about traffic velocity, right? And and that's what level of service measures, right? So I don't know if we're bound to do these. I don't know if there's some kind of requirement that we have to have them, but I'd love to see something that is more related to what we care about in the city with those traffic impact analyses, right? It's really more of a transportation safety impact analysis or something else like that. It's the frustration is that when we get those, it's always too late. Those are prepared so early, and the developer's already incurred the expense, and the consultant's already been brought in, and it's already kind of baked. I'd love to see something in the process that's unique for what we're looking for here in the city, rather than what I think is standard planning practice, but doesn't really seem to pertain to us. Thank you.
That's great, Mr. Fuentes. I hear you on that one. Okay, Ms. Weiss, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that nicely tees up actually kind of the two buckets of things I'd like to talk about at the advance. One is what we work on when we have the choice to set our agenda, and the other is how we work. So are we getting traffic impact assessments or the traffic safety impact assessments? Like, what's the thing? And in the category of how we work, in the past few special exception projects I've gone through, all the special exception projects I go through, and I look at the comprehensive plan, and these are grillions of pages, and you can find anything you want in them, to be frank. And so I wonder, as we embark on a new small area plan for the East End, can we think about a new, more targeted approach to small area plans that really crystallizes the choices that we'd like to see made? And that maybe that means that those documents don't live quite as long as our strategies and preferences change over time. I think the Broad Street small area plan that sort of governs the Founders Row 2 project was updated in 2016. So can we think of new ways of tackling comprehensive plans, for example? And in terms of what we work on, it would be surprising to everyone to hear me say this, I'm sure, but I would like to make sure we get climate resilience back on the agenda. I think that was on our agenda for this year or last year, and it fell by the wayside with this pandemic. But I think there's a climate resilience plan, there's a community design, there's a few different places where that came up, but I just want to make sure that's back on our agenda, at least for consideration at the advance.
Also good suggestions. Ms. Comer.
I like all these ideas. It's going to be a busy discussion, I think. I was wondering if I think when we looked at the special exception criteria with the revision to the primary criteria, we had felt at the time like the whole document might need a little bit of an updating, and it kind of ties into my feeling of I feel like these projects come to us, we're asking for 15% tree canopy, we don't ever get 15% tree canopy. So how can we ensure that when these projects come to us, they have 15% tree canopy? I want to figure that out, so that these projects, when that we're actually building things that reflect our values and that we want to be building in the city, and we aren't sort of starting, all the way back at square zero and fighting incrementally for more tree canopy coverage. So I don't know exactly how we do that, but that is a problem that I see as a new planning commission member who's somewhat inexperienced with all of these processes, and it would be great to figure out if there's a way that we can strengthen that special exception criteria, maybe boosting some of those secondary criteria to primary criteria, so you have to do these things, making the language stronger. I don't know what it is, but I'd love to talk about it with you more experienced members. And then definitely second on all of affordable housing in the CIP, climate resilience, accessory dwellings, exploring that. And I'd also, Mr. Stevens has raised a few times the idea of looking at form-based codes. And I don't know that that's necessarily something we need to tackle here, but maybe, some presentations or a speaker series on that would be helpful to better understanding that as an alternative to our current code.
Also, good points all around. We could probably write a whole meeting on, the idea of form-based code, and I'm sure staff has vetted that idea around. I know Jim Snyder is very familiar with that from Arlington. Let's see, Paul, your hand popped up a few minutes ago. I want to give you a chance to jump in if you have something to add.
Yeah, I was just going to throw out that I think the tentative date. So one thing that may be helpful to think about is sort of the product that comes out of the advance. I think this is a great idea for the commission to be holding its advance in December. One of the things that's helpful about that is that the tentative date, I think, I'll have to double check what it is, but I think a tentative date for the council's 2-year annual advance has been set for sometime in January. So something that might be helpful to come out of this meeting is of course some sort of recommendation for what ought to be on the council's work plan. Just for example, a couple of things that came up just in the last few comments here. One was about the accessory dwellings. It was actually brought up at the EDC about whether the city ought to be looking at T-zones and allowing for some sort of multifamily option in the T-zones. And so that's another form of missing middle. And so if the interest from the commission is in missing middle housing and the interest in the council is a T-zone update, that might be a place where those two interests can align. Similarly, there was the question about climate resilience. I think there is funding available for consultant services. And the environmental coordinators working on this, Kate Walker, is on a greenhouse gas reduction plan. And I think we're trying to get that scheduled actually for the Planning Commission's meeting December 1st, I think is what we're trying for, is to get the draft plan in front of the commission on that December 1st meeting. So that might be a place where those things align. So thinking about this meeting as a way to maybe understand where the council's going, but also influence maybe the council at their 2-year annual advance. Not influence in a bad way, but say, hey, here are the things that we're hearing in the community that we think are in the community and ought to be included in that 2-year work plan.
Right. No, that's a good to remember. Right, exactly what the point of it is. Okay, and of course Derek's not here, but we all know if Derek was here, he would be hitting the affordable housing theme, which we've all kind of touched on. But and I know when he participates in the advance, that's obviously his number one issue. Not his only issue, but his number one issue for sure. And so, certainly I know that will be part of the discussion. Well, how much time have we set aside for it, just so we know? I mean, obviously we could probably spend, all day and night talking about some of this stuff, but just so we can be efficient, I think, is it 2 hours or 3 hours? I mean, what do we normally
for the advance? So this round, I have so far been successful in keeping all other agenda items off that meeting night. So rules of procedure, you guys could be going from 7:30 to 10:30. I might need 2 sandwiches each, but we've got time.
So, okay, well, and that's kind of what I was thinking, right? The point was to keep that night completely open so we could devote it to this. Ms. Weiss, your hand is back up. Go ahead.
I think you should take sandwiches away if we spend that long on rules and procedures. But in the bucket of how we work, I just, Ms. Comad's comment about the secondary criteria sort of reminded me of conversations that some of us have had over time, just that, our secondary criteria are a little squishy and our voluntary concessions, cover everything. We don't have sort of density incentives, or I'm losing the term here, but if you achieve this green building standard, you get more density. If you achieve this affordable housing goal, you get more density. We don't have a way of developing that enables that. So is there an alternative way for us to measure our progress as a city and look at where the gaps are in terms of the things that we look for in our voluntary concessions and our secondary criteria? Like, if we're always getting money for the library, but it turns out that the library has plenty of money, can some of that, the voluntary concessions go to another, need in the community. So, I mean, just sort of thinking about in the absence of density bonuses, maybe we think about adding density bonuses and finally revising how we do development, but is there some other way of kind of judging how we're doing on our development overall in the city? That made sense.
It does make sense, right? I mean, right. If you don't measure, you're not measuring how you're doing, then you don't really know. So yeah. Ms. Comer, go ahead.
Sorry, what is the date for the advance? Is it the 1st, Paul?
It's the next one.
No. The 15th?
Correct. The second meeting in December, Wednesday, December 15th. The eyes.
Okay, and it will be in person because there will be sandwiches.
Yes.
7:30 sandwiches. So don't eat dinner before.
So yeah, we'll be in person in council chambers, assuming we'll get the room reservation in the works right away. That's the only room that's set up for planning commission for public meetings at this point. If we want to have them televised in any way.
Okay, thanks.
And I guess that's an option for the commission. You don't have to hold a televised public meeting. I mean, it always has to be an open public meeting that anyone could come and participate, but it doesn't necessarily have to be televised. I know that's the way the commission is run for quite a while.
I think in the past we haven't televised the advance, right? I mean, technically it's public, but we haven't televised it.
I think we have. I think we started televising the advances maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and we've televised them ever since. If I remember correctly, I could go back and double check tapes. Maybe I should double check before maybe I should go back and double check that.
Check. I seem to recall that one year we did it in like the conference room, like the new, next to the council chambers, the conference room. That's the last one I remember.
Yeah, that has cameras set up in it in order for us to run the meetings in there, but it's not keyed into Teams. So the reason everything has to run out of council chambers right now is a technology limitation in terms of getting cable, Granicus, Teams all talking to each other. It has to be in council chambers right now. But if we didn't want to do all that rigmarole, then we'd be more open in room
settings. I mean, that's something to talk about. I think like being in a more informal setting is better for conversation. So, and if we don't, again, we have nothing to hide, but if we don't need to televise it, it's probably just. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, other people on this commission have been here longer than me, but I don't think that we televised it. Because I just don't. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. You can check, Paul, and let us know. But we don't have to. It might be better just to have a more casual conversation, to not do it that way. I mean, if anyone wants to attend because it's a public meeting, that's fine. But yeah. So you can look into that and let us know.
Sure. Yeah. Obviously, anything the commission's going to do meet the requirements for open meeting laws. Anyone can attend. There will be minutes.
People can come and sit in, and I think in the past we've had. I don't know if we ever had someone come. I know we used to have a few members of the public that like to come to all our meetings, and that's great. But yeah, if we don't have to, broadcast it, it might be better just to have a casual, informal conversation. Ms. Weiss, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on whether it's televised or not, but I do have a strong opinion on us being around a table so we can look at each other and really engage with each other, whether it's in council chambers or the conference room next door. I think that'll be much more effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, being like up at the horseshoe or the dais, it's kind of hard to. You're right. It's not always the best way to have like a conversation. Agreed. Ms. Comer, did you have something else?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I agree with Ms. Weiss, and I was just wondering, how does the public participate in this, since it's not sort of like a typical meeting?
I think the point of it is that it's just it's open to the public to listen, if they were so chose to attend, and I think in the past, just like any other meeting, we have minutes and we kind of summarize what we talk about. That's obviously 100% public. But we don't. It's really meant to be like a more of an internal type of, discussion or for the commission, like a work session. So it's not a public hearing, and we don't take formal public comment. I mean, members of the public are free to send us a letter or email, about any topic, any subject at any time. So if anyone, had suggestions about things they think we should be talking about, by all means. But it is meant to be a work session style discussion for us only.
Okay, great. Thanks.
I see Councilman Duncan has mentioned that the City Council's tentatively planning its visioning meeting for Saturday, January the 8th.
Right. So this is our version of that, in our own way. Right. And so having us do it earlier in the year too is also, you can see there's a lot of logic to that. And good. And the 15th it's our second meeting, and I figured it's not close, hopefully everyone can make it. I don't know, Derek is not here, but if everyone else, if anyone else has any conflicts, because I know we're getting sort of close to the holidays. School's still in session that week, I think. So hopefully people are still mostly around. But yeah, that's why we picked that date, because it was open and it was one of the few dates that we had where we could try to set it aside. So that's the plan. So okay, well, I appreciate everyone's feedback. I think Paul and staff heard it too. And if anyone, of course, has any further suggestions on that meeting, we still have some time, so feel free to share it. Otherwise, that was all we had set to talk about today. Correspondence, there was a comment letter on Founders Row 2, so everyone can read that as part of preparation for our next meeting. And with that, unless anyone has any other comments for the good of the cause, I will call the November 3rd meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night. Thanks all.
Good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye.